Hello. If you're watching this on the date published, then today is Thursday the 4th of July, the day of the general election. If the polls are to be believed, then the 14 years of Conservative rule will come to an end and the Labour Party will take over running the country. If that happens, we're likely to hear a farewell speech from the outgoing Prime Minister about the privilege it has been to serve, what he has achieved, and how sad he is that his time has come to an end. While he wasn't voted out, in the Old Testament we read that Joshua, who had led the children of Israel into the land God had promised them, had reached retirement age and brought people together to give a farewell speech. Let's read Joshua 23. After a long time had passed and the Lord had given Israel rest from all their enemies around them, Joshua, by then a very old man, summoned all Israel, their elders, leaders, judges and officials, and said to them, I am very old. You yourselves have seen everything the Lord your God has done to all these nations for your sake. It was the Lord your God who fought for you. Remember how I have allotted as an inheritance for your tribes all the lands of the nations that remain, the nations I conquered, between the Jordan and the Mediterranean Sea in the west. The Lord your God himself will push them out for your sake. He will drive them out before you, and you will take possession of their land, as the Lord your God promised you. Be very strong. Be careful to obey all that is written in the book of the law of Moses, without turning aside to the right or to the left. Do not associate with these nations that remain among you. Do not invoke the name of their gods or swear by them. You must not serve them or bow down to them, but you are to hold fast to the Lord your God, as you have until now. The Lord has driven out before you great and powerful nations. To this day no one has been able to withstand you. One of you routs 1,000, because the Lord your God fights for you, just as he promised. So be very careful to love the Lord your God. But if you turn away and ally yourselves with the survivors of these nations that remain among you, and if you intermarry with them and associate with them, then you may be sure that the Lord your God will no longer drive out these nations before you. Instead, they will become snares and traps for you, whips on your back and thorns in your eyes, until you perish from this good land, which the Lord your God has given you. Now I am about to go the way of all the earth. You know with all your heart and soul that not one of all the good promises of the Lord your God gave you has failed. Every promise has been fulfilled, not one has failed. But just as all the good things the Lord your God has promised you have come to you, so he will bring on you all the evil things he has threatened, until the Lord your God has destroyed you from this good land he has given you. If you violate the covenant of the Lord your God, which he commanded you, and go and serve other gods and bow down to them, the Lord's anger will burn against you, and you will quickly perish from the good land he has given you. There are just a few sentences from this that I want us to look at today. Verse 8, you are to hold fast to the Lord your God, as you have until now. The children of Israel had entered the promised land and defeated all who stood in their way, often against the odds. Earlier in the Bible, in Deuteronomy, they'd been given instructions on holding fast to what would happen if they did. If you carefully observe all these commands I am giving you to follow, to love the Lord your God, to walk in obedience to him and to hold fast to him, then the Lord will drive out all these nations before you, and you will dispossess nations larger and stronger than you. Seemingly they had managed to hold fast, and indeed defeated peoples larger and stronger than them. While we're not in the position of needing to drive out and conquer nations, we do live in times where Western society is turning further away from seeing the need of God, that the laws we live by are changing and moving away from biblical teaching. Are there times when we compromise our beliefs to the culture we find ourselves in? Or do we have lines in our faith that we will not cross, do we hold fast to the Lord our God, knowing that through him we are stronger. The second sentence is in verse 11. So be very careful to love the Lord your God. While this again points back to the verse in Deuteronomy, I think it's good to look at. First, love the Lord your God. Jesus in the book of Mark is asked what the greatest commandment is, and he quotes from Deuteronomy. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. So we know when Joshua is speaking here, he's spot on saying be very careful to love the Lord your God. To do something carefully demands our attention. We often say to children to be careful when carrying a drink or be careful crossing the road. We want to drill into them the importance of being focused on what they are doing at a particular moment. Here Joshua is saying be very careful. That is extra attention, extra focus. Be very careful to love the Lord your God. Loving God should not, and indeed cannot, be something we get used to doing without thinking. Are we very careful, very deliberate, very mindful each day to love God? And in what ways can we do that? Towards the end of the chapter, Joshua says, you know with all your heart and soul that not one of all the good promises the Lord your God gave you has failed. During the past few weeks, politicians have promised a bright new future built on money that currently doesn't exist, staffing schools and hospitals with teachers and nurses that we don't yet have. Whether these things come about with the new government, only time will tell. But it's perhaps not that big of a surprise that sometimes what we are promised doesn't happen. But that's not the case with God. Depending on where you look, you'll get a different answer, but it would seem that in the Bible there are over 3,000 promises from God. From the promise we've already heard in Deuteronomy, to the promise never to flood the earth again, and promises that we will never be alone and have power through God. The people Joshua was talking to here had seen firsthand what God promised would come true. Escaping Egypt and winning battles that should be far beyond their capabilities. Here Joshua is using this as a warning. Yes, you have seen that God will do as he promised, but you must do as you are asked. If you don't hold fast to the Lord, if you're not very careful to love the Lord your God, then the promises don't apply to you. It's not that God will break his promise, but more that you haven't done your part to get what was promised. This is a picture that's repeated many times in the Bible, that if we do something, God will do something. Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be opened to you. I wonder if far too often I rest on the promises of God too easily without really carrying out my part of the deal. The parts I'm supposed to do should be easy compared to what God is offering in return, and yet I still do my own thing far too often. The biggest of promises is in John 3:16 and is one for the future. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life. This one doesn't rely on us being the perfect model Christian. It doesn't need us to ask, seek, knock, draw near, give up everything. The hard work here is done by Jesus, and the promise is forever. We just need to believe. So today, putting your faith in Jesus, hold fast to the Lord your God. Be very careful to love the Lord your God. And know that not one of all the good promises the Lord your God gave you has or will fail.